Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling something that you guys specifically requested, and that is the impact of social media. Now, before you tune out thinking this is another social media's bad rant, I promise you it's not. We're not going to be demonizing platforms or telling you to delete all your accounts. Instead, we're going to be going kind of beyond those typical arguments, and we're going to be looking at some real conversations that we found and kind of digging into some surprising connections that we found there. And to make things even more interesting, we're also going to be exploring how all of this connects to marriage trends.
Yeah, marriage
Yeah.
trends, social media, it's all connected. But rather than getting caught up in this good versus bad debate that we always
Okay.
seem to have around social media, I think what's more important is to try to understand, the nuances. Like, what are the forces that are at play here, and how are they actually, shaping our individual experiences with these platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that we notice over and over again in these conversations that we looked at was this feeling of being pulled in, like almost addicted. People talking about spending hours scrolling, their productivity just tanking. And it's almost like social media is taking over their lives.
Right, and that makes sense. I mean, think about it. Social media really taps into this very human need for connection and belonging.
Yeah.
It offers us validation, it gives us information, it gives us this platform to express ourselves. So it's understandable that people can feel hooked.
Totally. It's like we know we should be doing other things, but we can't seem to pull ourselves away. And it's interesting because in one of the conversations that we found, somebody was sharing a story about a student, I think her name was Anna, who actually failed an exam because she was spending so much time on social media.
Oh, wow. See, that's a perfect example of what we call opportunity cost. So it's not that social media is inherently bad, right? It's that every choice we make means saying no to something else.
So in Anna's case, she chose social media over studying.
Exactly. And she paid the price for it.
Yeah. And I think we've all had our own Anna moments, right? Where we've chosen social media over something else that was maybe more important.
Right? Think about it. Have you ever been working on a project
Yeah.
or trying to have a conversation with someone, and you find yourself just mindlessly scrolling through your phone?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
That's opportunity cost in action.
Okay, so it's not about demonizing social media,
Yeah.
but it is about being aware of the trade-offs. Now, having said all of that, the conversations that we looked at also highlighted ways in which people are finding value and meaning in their social media use.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about intentionality.
Okay, so how can we be more intentional with our social media use?
Well, one thing you can do is to think about what you're actually trying to get out of it. Are you looking to connect with friends and family? Are you trying to learn new things? Or are you just looking to be entertained?
Right, because if we're just mindlessly scrolling without any purpose.
Then we're likely to end up feeling drained and empty. And it's also about being mindful of the accounts that you follow. Are they inspiring you? Are they teaching you something new? Or are they just adding to the noise and clutter in your life?
So it's kind of like curating your own social media experience.
Precisely. It's about being selective and choosing what you want to let into your feed.
Okay, that makes sense. So intentionality is key. But now here's where things get really interesting. The conversations that we were looking at also delved into a seemingly unrelated topic, marriage, specifically the differences between love marriages and arranged marriages.
Yeah, you might be wondering, what in the world does that have to do with social media?
Right, exactly.
But it's actually more connected than you might think.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So tell me, what were some of the key points that came up in that debate?
Well, those who favored love marriages really emphasize the importance of individual choice. Knowing your partner deeply before committing
Yeah.
and building a relationship based on shared interests and that emotional connection.
Right, and that definitely aligns with kind of the individualistic values that we often see promoted on social media. What about the arguments for arranged marriages?
Well, those who supported arranged marriages highlighted the role of family and community. In finding a suitable match, they emphasized things like compatibility based on shared values, cultural background, long-term goals, rather than solely on romantic feelings.
So it's like two very different approaches to finding a partner. And I guess the question is, how does social media fit into all of this?
Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, I can't wait. But before we move on, we need to talk about a story that came up in these conversations that really got us thinking about the emotional intensity of relationships, especially when they end.
Oh yeah, this one was a doozy.
So there was this woman named Veronica, and she was talking about a friend of hers who went through a particularly rough breakup. And her friend's reaction was so intense that it had some serious consequences in her life.
Yeah, heartbreak is tough. But the question is social media making it even harder?
Hmm, that's a good question. I mean, could it be that the constant exposure to seemingly perfect relationships online
Hmm.
is making it harder for people to cope with the realities of heartbreak and loss in their own lives?
It's definitely something to think about. Are we setting ourselves up for disappointment by comparing our experiences to these curated versions of love and happiness that we see online?
And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone.
Mm.
So, before the break, we were talking about Veronica's friend
Mm-hmm.
and her pretty extreme reaction to that breakup she went through. And it really got us thinking about, like, yeah, how much heartbreak can really hurt. And
Yeah.
and if social media is making those feelings even stronger.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, like, are we more vulnerable when we're going through heartbreak? If we're constantly bombarded with, all these perfect relationships online, right? Because it's like you're scrolling through your feed and it's all happy couples and romantic vacations. And then you look at your own life and you're like, wait a minute, why doesn't my relationship look like that?
Exactly. And it's so easy to get caught up in those comparisons. Like you start to think that maybe something's wrong with you or that your relationship isn't good enough.
Right. And it makes you wonder if we're losing sight of what real connection actually is.
I think so. Like, are we confusing the performance of connection on social media with actual genuine connection?
Hmm.
You can have thousands of followers and hundreds of likes on a post. But does that really mean you have meaningful relationships in your life?
That's such a good point because it's like we're so focused on building our online presence that we're forgetting to nurture the relationships that we have in the real world.
And I think that's where the idea of intentionality comes in. Just like we talked about being intentional with the content that we consume on social media, we can also be intentional about the connections that we're nurturing.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, for starters, we can ask ourselves, am I using social media to actually connect with people who matter to me? Or am I just using it to seek validation through likes and followers?
And I guess the answer to that question will really determine how we use social media moving forward.
Absolutely. If we're just using it to boost our ego, then we're probably not going to find the kind of deep connection that we're craving.
Right, we're going to be left feeling empty and unfulfilled.
But if we're using it to intentionally connect with people, to share our lives, to support each other, then social media can actually be a powerful tool for building relationships.
Okay, so intentionality is key. Now, remember earlier we were talking about that debate between love marriages and arranged marriages?
Yeah, what was that all about?
Well, I'm starting to see how that connects to what we're talking about now.
Oh, yeah, how so?
Well, one of the core arguments for arranged marriages was that families play a key role in selecting compatible partners.
Right, they're taking into account things like shared values, cultural background, long-term goals.
Exactly. And it's like, in a way, social media is kind of becoming a modern-day matchmaker.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. We have dating apps that use algorithms to match people based on their interests, location, even their personality traits.
So you're saying it's like we're outsourcing that initial screening process to technology.
Exactly. Instead of relying solely on family or community networks to find us a partner, we're letting algorithms narrow down the field.
That's a pretty interesting way to think about it.
But the thing is, algorithms can only take us so far.
Right, they can't measure chemistry or that intangible spark that draws two people together,
And they're limited by the data that they have access to.
which might not always reflect the full complexity of a person's personality or relationship desires.
So it's like we're back to this tension between individual choice and curated profiles, which is very much a product of the social media age. And the idea of compatibility and shared values, which was central to the concept of arranged marriages.
Right, so we're trying to balance those two things.
Okay. And that brings us back to the story about Veronica's friend.
And the potential for heartbreak.
Yes, because it's like, on one hand, we have all this freedom and choice when it comes to finding a partner, but on the other hand, we're also exposed to this constant stream of perfect relationships online, which might be making us more vulnerable when things don't work out.
So the question is, are we using social media to build genuine connections that can weather the storms of life? Or are we just seeking fleeting validation that leaves us feeling empty and even more vulnerable when things get tough?
It's a really important question.
And it's one that we're going to explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
So stay tuned. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media, but now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what all of this means for you. Like, how can we actually take what we've learned and apply it to our own lives?
Right, because at the end of the day, it's not about just understanding the problem. It's about finding solutions.
Exactly. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that we have a choice. We
Yeah.
could choose to be swept away by the tide of social media, or we can choose to be the captain of our own ship and navigate these waters with intention and purpose.
Okay, I love that analogy. So how do we become those captains?
One thing you can do is to practice mindful technology use, which is really just about creating boundaries and setting limits, like you would with a budget.
Okay, so it's like being intentional with our resources.
Exactly. You wouldn't spend all your money in one place without considering your other needs.
Right.
So it's the same thing with your time and attention.
So what are some practical things that we can do?
Well, you can start by setting specific times for checking social media, turning off notifications,
Yeah.
or even designating certain days as like digital detox days.
So it's not about depriving yourself, it's more about creating space for other things in your life.
Exactly. Like spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies,
Yeah.
getting out in nature, or just being present in the moment.
Right, because at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to bring us true happiness and fulfillment.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember that social media is just a tool. It can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we're going to use it.
Okay, so mindful technology use is key. But what about the emotional side of things? We've talked a lot about the potential for heartbreak and disappointment. So how can we build resilience in a world where we're constantly exposed to these idealized versions of love and relationships?
Well, one of the best ways to do that is to focus on building genuine connections offline. Spend time with people who make you feel good. Engage in activities that bring you joy. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable and authentic with the people you care about.
So it's like we need to shift our focus from the online world to the real world.
Exactly. Because real connection happens in person, not through a screen.
And I think that's a really important message to remember, especially in today's world.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Social media can be a powerful tool, but it's up to us to use it wisely. Be intentional about the content you consume, the connections you nurture, and the time you spend online. And most importantly, don't let social media define you or your relationships.
That's great advice. Well, that's all the time we have for today. But I hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about and some tools to help you navigate the complex world of social media and relationships. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting,